Many people don't know that Stranger Things monsters aren't just villains meant to cause chaos. Their design, purpose, and history all have a deeper meaning that could help identify the pattern of their attacks and which characters they could be going for next. And we've compiled a full breakdown of what each of these monsters means and the messages they pass with their mode of operation. Of all the monsters in Stranger Things, Vecna surprised everyone the most in its human and monster form, especially in the backstory of how everything came to be. As an essential monster who appears in seasons 4 and 5 of the show, he has a Dungeons and Dragons origin, just like the other monsters in the show. In the D&D lore, Vecna is a lich, an undead creature. He's a sorcerer who seeks to become God, which is evident in how he created the Upside Down to control everything and everyone. This monster in D&D represents betrayal, forbidden knowledge, and doom. Still, in Stranger Things, Vecna manifests himself in a more abstract way, which gives him immense power in how he selects and conquers his victims. In Season 4, we don't just get to see Henry Creel's traumatizing past as a backstory. It's one of the most essential parts of the monster that ties him to his victims. Based on his crazy childhood story, the monster he became signifies every related danger he went through, which is deep psychological trauma, repressed grief, and guilt. The monster feeds to grow, and Vecna wasn't always that powerful until he started feeding a lot, and his favorite meal is unresolved emotional pain. And that leads us to the kinds of victims he attacks, who all have a painful childhood history as he feeds on their trauma and gets to position them upside down where their worst memories play. These are obvious when he starts drawing Max, who feels guilty about Billy's demise, making Max the perfect victim for Vecna. Sooner than later, Max began experiencing signs like seeing the grandfather clock and having a nosebleed, which gets super crazy when you realize all of these were in Vecna's childhood. There are other symptoms associated with Vecna that the victims experience, like headaches and hallucinations. His other victim, Chrissy, also had hallucinations of her abusive mother and past trauma, which is what Vecna enjoys and relates to. The auto crash also haunted Fred, whom he felt responsible for, and there's no other perfect victim for Vecna than one with guilt that won't go away. Patrick was also another victim who was abused and ended up drowning through a hallucination, and it's a consistent pattern with Vecna, which conveys the type of characters he targets and the signs to know they will soon be dead, which Max experienced on a grand scale in Season 4. Stranger Things isn't just a scary show, but also a disturbing one with how the monsters attack and tear the victims apart, and the Flesh Flayer did a lot of that, and it's the manifestation of the Mind Flayer in flesh. In the D&D lore, this monster resembles shambling mounds or flesh golems representing body horror and loss of self. The physical manifestation shows people melting into something else, so this monster is very graphical. The Flesh Flayer represents how people are turned into puppets by society, and it targets emotionally fragile people who have no minds of their own or are close to the flayed. It also makes sure to choose people who are easily infected and unlikely to be noticed. The Flesh Flayer attacked Billy, who is shown to have a traumatic past and abusive father with deep-seated rage. So he was a perfect victim who was already emotionally compromised, and Flayer did his thing by taking over and controlling Billy's mind. Another of its victims is Heather, who appears normal but gets flayed because of her interaction with Billy. Flayer also picks its victims by connection, and the warning signs for its victims are behavioral changes as they become aggressive, cold, and robotic, like they are being controlled, vomiting, becoming paranoid, avoiding light, and getting nightmares. So it becomes predictable when a character starts having these symptoms that a Flesh Flayer is close by and ready to attack. Its attack mode is so crazy because it begins with rats and is utterly different from the Mind Flayer, which we will unravel soon. The Demogorgon kickstarted the show with its monstrous power, and in the D&D lore, this monster is a demon prince with 2 baboon heads and tentacles, symbolizing chaos and duality. However, the Demogorgon in the show doesn't look like its D&D logic, but the Hawkins gang named it based on that. Being one of the early monsters introduced in the show, it represents the unknown and untamed horror of the Upside Down. It is the first intrusion of the hidden world into Hawkins and mirrors Eleven's trauma and government secrecy. This monster has a unique pattern as it feeds on isolation and targets characters who are alone or an outcast, which is precisely who Will is and one of the first victims of the Demogorgon. Among the kids, Will has always been different, isolated, misunderstood, and emotionally distant from others, which became even more apparent in Season 4. And when Will vanished, that signified being swallowed by a world no one else sees or understands. He has a lot of things his friends don't understand, even if they are staring at them, and the Demogorgon fed on that in Season 1 and captured him while biking home alone. This monster also had another perfect victim, Barbara, who felt abandoned and invisible, and a third wheel in Nancy and Steve's relationship. And she was also snatched by the Demogorgon during her moment of isolation at Steve's pool. And since the victims are always alone during attacks, it tracks them through blood and sound. So it's a big message when a character is isolated because the monster breeds on that. The warning signs accompanying Demogorgon are flickering lights, interdimensional spores, sudden cold, and deceased animals. Just like the show opens with Demogorgon, it closes with one of the most dangerous ones, which is Thessalyra, who was foreshadowed in Season 4. In the D&D lore, this is a massive serpent hydra with 8 acid-spitting heads and regenerative powers. It represents Final Boss, who's impossible to beat with brute force alone, which is why Stranger Things saved the monster for the last. This monster symbolizes war, different types of trauma, and evil, and when one of its heads is cut, another rises, and it's a monster that rises to enforce the final manifestation of the upside-down collective will. Other previous monsters have tried, and the Thessalyra is showing up to make it happen through whichever means necessary, including war and apocalypse. This monster doesn't make single attacks, it goes after characters standing in the way of total invasion, which means all Hawkins kids are concerned. It doesn't matter if it leads to utter destruction, the monster thrives by creating chaos to achieve its primary goal. The warning signs of this monster's presence include massive environmental shifts, the upside down physically merging with Hawkins, biological changes in the environment, collective nightmares, and visions for all the characters, especially Eleven, who has been suppressing most of the attacks for a long time. This monster is enormous enough to shake the entirety of Season 5. Season 4 was thoroughly shaken as well, and not just by Vecna. The tiny monsters also pulled their weights, especially the Demobats, which ended up causing the demise of the fan favorite Eddie Munson. In the D&D lore, Demobats are similar to Sturges or Varghul, flying horrific monsters that latch on and suck life. These tiny demons are an extension of Vecna's psychological invasiveness as they defend his territory and react to threats by attacking in groups. The Demobats are the representation of loss of control and swarm tactics. Unlike the bigger and more strategic monsters in Stranger Things, these don't have a particular type of victim they feed on, as they mostly go after intruders in the Upside Down or anyone targeting Vecna's sacred space. Eddie's demise wasn't particularly intended until he tried distracting the bat during the final battle in Season 4, and the bats swarmed and fatally injured him despite these attacks not following a specific pattern. It speaks to the message Eddie represents in the show, which is a misfit who was falsely blamed for the passing of Chrissy, and in his final moments he chose to sacrifice himself and yield to the attack of the bats. The bat attack on Eddie symbolizes the price of bravery in a world that misunderstands him. However, the bats also come with warning signs before attacks, loud shrieking, atmospheric changes, and hive-like silence before they come rushing in. And with these signs, you can get the message of which character is going down next. The Demodogs are almost similar to the Demobats, as they are seen as a young form of the Demogorgon and aren't exactly classic D&D monsters. Like the bats, the dogs represent the multiplying threat of the Upside Down, as they are numerous and invasive. Their presence in the show was to reveal that the Upside Down was evolving and no longer isolated with a limited number of monsters. One of the demo dogs in the show, Dart, shows how curiosity and emotional blindness can make danger creep in, which is how the beast found its way into Dustin's home as a pet. Since they aren't monsters with an exact mind, they attack in packs, targeting anyone who discovers them or gets in their path. They are also used for scouting and laying ambushes. They become powerful in numbers after Dart joins a pack to attack Hawkins' lab, where Steve and the others almost lose their lives. The warning signs that come with their attacks involve high-pitched screeches, damaged walls, disappearances, and strange animal behavior, and the message they pass is the innocent urge to nurture danger until it's too late. For the Mind Flayer, its D&D origin is rooted in Illithid, a powerful psychic monster that enslaves minds and consumes brains. It's a perfect representation of control, domination, and intellect. It is one of the most intelligent monsters in Stranger Things, symbolizing the loss of self-control, evident after it possessed Will in Season 2. This monster also represents invisible, invasive threats like PTSD, infection, and surveillance. After taking over a character's mind, it becomes the hive that controls all infected entities. Will suffers PTSD from Season 1, where he gets afraid of his own memories and sketches dark visions, which the Mind Flayer quickly preys on to attack Will. He was chosen for his psychic sensitivity and past exposure to the Upside Down, which has continued to haunt him throughout the show. However, the Mind Flayer attacks come with some crazy signs: extreme cold and neck sensitivity, which happens when Will feels a tingle on his neck, drawing and obsessing with shadowy figures. Of all the characters, Will continues to be the most susceptible to the Upside Down and an essential character that ties up all the monsters, which the monsters have been saying in their messages through their attacks on him.